Hello, everybody! Welcome to A Survivor's Guide to Hell, the podcast. I'm PJ Aubrey, here to walk you through this pessimist-friendly guide to finding the silver lining. Each week, we pick an unpleasant topic and share stories that will hopefully help you laugh, help you find a bright side, or even change your perspective on something. Thank you so much for listening. Today, our unpleasant topic is 2020. When it comes to describing 2020, one particular phrase has become very popular: dumpster fire. Oxford Languages defines a dumpster fire as a fire in a dumpster. Gee, thanks Oxford. But that's not the only definition. Oxford's second description reads, a chaotic or disastrously mishandled situation. There you have it. Little wonder that last year, the big 2020 has been dubbed the flaming trash bin of recent history. You've graduated year 2020. You lived through 365 days of a viral pandemic, police brutality, and political contention, and you already know a thing or two about how to survive hell. But what if we're only looking at the dark side of the coin? Perhaps very few of us will ever consider 2020 a phenomenal year, but what if it was just a bit more okay than we give it credit for? In today's 3-act podcast, we'll share a story about finding love in 2020. We'll have some laughs over a disastrous Thanksgiving meal for one, courtesy of COVID-19. Lastly, we'll review some things, wonderful, hilarious, or inspiring things that you probably forgot happened in 2020. Are you ready? Let's go! Act 1. Finding love in a dumpster fire. I spent the last few weeks asking friends what their favorite part of 2020 was. You want to know the most common answer I received? Well, I got married. It was encouraging for me to think that, despite the disasters of last year, people were still falling in love. If you stopped to listen, wedding bells were still ringing above the crackle of that dumpster fire. My friend Kristen Kamimoto was a senior at Brigham Young University, the first time she met her husband-to-be. I called her and invited her to share what it was like to fall in love with a boy named Ikaika during 2020.
I took notice of him right away. So it was fall 2019. Ever since that moment, he was on my radar. Anytime I saw him on campus, I was like, oh, hey.
There's him.
But definitely didn't talk to him or really anything until a lot later.
Okay, I should warn you, this was one of my closest friends, and it was the first time I'd heard the whole story. So there's a lot of unprofessional giggling and exclaiming on my part. Don't worry, I've learned my lesson, but you may have to put up with a little extra girlish excitement for this episode. Here we go.
What was his experience like noticing you?
I feel like for him it was more dramatic. We talked a couple times, but he wasn't really paying attention, I guess. But when he finally noticed me, it was January 19th.
What?
2020. And the way that he has described it is he walked into the room that I was, and it just hit him. He just looked at me and it was oh my goodness.
I love it.
I need to take this girl on a date or whatever. It just hit him really sudden.
Kristen went on to explain the first time she acknowledged that she loved him. She was sitting alone at a red light and the words just exploded out. I love him! Ikaika had a similar experience, which happened while he was spending time with some friends. I love her, he told them, for the very first time. The proposal story was even sweeter. After a day of horseback riding and dining on her grandparents' magnificent ranch, Ikaika invited Kristen to accompany him on a walk. I want to take some pictures of the sunset, he'd said. So they left to stroll the grounds of the ranch, just him and her. Then, bathed in the light of the setting star, Ikaika knelt down and asked, "Will you marry me?" According to Kristen, it was perfect. She remembers becoming so excited that her voice rose to a high-pitched shout. Ikaika reacted by yelling back, "Will you?"
I think he didn't realize he was shouting it, but will you? Yes!
It was a lovely story. But of course, I knew 2020 tended to be unfriendly to loners and lovers alike. I'd heard stories of single folks entering the mad dash to find a partner, just so they wouldn't have to winter the pandemic alone. When it came to already married couples thrown into a stuffy quarantine together, well, divorce rates went up. I asked Kristen how the pandemic had affected her courtship and wedding prep.
I mean, aside from COVID-19, creating an environment that was very conducive to dating and always being together and having a lot more time than we expected, I feel like, having this pandemic was really helpful in some ways. The fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic made the simplest, fastest wedding possible. Like, we were able to get married at the end of August, plan that wedding so quickly because it was going to be like really low key. We weren't going to have to do a huge reception. But it just ended up being so beautiful. When Mikaika and I sat down to plan the wedding, that was one of our very biggest values, things we cared about. We want it to feel like a community, and even if not everyone can be there, we want to spend quality time with people that we love and care about. Yeah, so that's kind of what it was. It was small enough that it was close and just felt like we only did the essential things, but those were the things that mattered the most and just made it a really beautiful experience.
It was wonderful to hear that the pandemic hadn't thrashed one of the most important days of my friend's life. In fact, the pandemic had sweetened it. It made me wonder how many others had a similar experience. Could the complicated hoorah of a traditional wedding make that special day a little less special? Something Kristen said, however, gave me pause.
You said something that struck me as unusual. You said that COVID created an environment that was ideal for dating. What do you mean by that?
At least I've had experiences, and I think a lot of people could relate in that oftentimes our lives and just how busy they are, it gets in the way of what matters most, and sometimes that means the people in our lives we want to get to know. So the fact that, we had to kind of slow everything down and we didn't have to be 50 places at once all of a sudden, it helped us be able to go home and visit our families for a bit together, and meet each other's families. It helped us so that we could do school together, we could study next to each other more often. We just got to exist in the same space so much more than we would have otherwise. And even though life is kind of hopefully starting to pick up, I really hope that that aspect stays, that we take more time and try to find ways to just slow life down and make time for the people that matter most.
I'd heard similar sentiments from Hallmark commercials, but when I heard it from one of my best friends, who was actually practicing what she preached, it landed a little closer to heart. My husband and I have been experiencing our own trials during this pandemic, like everyone else. Some related to the quarantine, others not. Perhaps we haven't mastered the art of slowing life down quite yet. After all, there are more opportunities to be had when you don't have those 50 places to get to. There's new games to play with your kids, more opportunities to say, "Aww," more time to get to know that guy who sleeps in the other half of your bed and keeps elbowing you in the face at night. Sure, Kristen and Ikaika have an advantage. If there were ever a time in a marriage where being super glued together was easy, it would be the newlywed phase. But Kristen still has a point when she talks about enjoying life at a slower speed. I'm as excited as the next guy to get this chaotic COVID world in the past. Yet a little part of me wants the quarantine to last a bit longer. I want to learn to appreciate a life that's closer to my loved ones before a different kind of chaos, the version we call normal life, picks back up again. Act 2. Thanksgiving for One. Our next story comes from my dear friend Jackie. Thanks to 2020 related complications, she was manning Thanksgiving alone last year. The story of her foibles and feasting was enough to make me laugh, and maybe it will do the same for you. No one can tell it better than Jackie herself. I asked her permission to include a Marco Polo she sent me.
Thanksgiving Thanksgiving was a bit of a mixed bag. I had a great time cooking and dancing and singing loudly in my kitchen. I set off every fire alarm, so I had to open all the windows, and took a picture of the beautiful meal that I built. It was steak and mashed potatoes and gravy and homemade rolls and Brussels sprouts. And as soon as I took the picture and sent it on Snapchat, I turned around and the plate slipped off the counter and crashed all over the floor. So...
Did you catch that laughing? That was Jackie's roommate. I presume she was listening in and couldn't hold back any longer.
I screamed real loud and realized my neighbors were right outside the window and could see and hear me for the entire 2 hours I was drunk cooking and singing, dancing, and having a delightful time. So hopefully I don't ever have to talk to them.
There's a happy ending here. Jackie told me she was able to save the steak, and she'd made enough of the other sides to have a Thanksgiving take two. For all of us who got to hear the story, there was even dessert. A good laugh. Thanks, Jackie. Here's to next Thanksgiving.
I used to have 2 stomachs, one for dinner, one dessert. The first would fill up quickly, and the second always growled and gurgled.
Act 3, what you may have forgot about 2020. With the mayhem of last year, it's hard to remember that there was more to 2020 than SJWs, a fumbling presidential election, and the COVID. The following 3 stories were chosen to help us remember the big picture. Yes, other stuff happened last year, and some of it was pretty cool, even inspiring in the most unexpected ways. For our first story of this act, a teenager takes Twitter. While the coronavirus raged and politicians did the same, a whole new chaos was brewing undetected. On July 15th, folks at Twitter began receiving questionable phone calls. Some just reported the suspicious activity and moved on with their jobs. Others fell for the caller's ploy and gave away information that would eventually lead to fraudulent posts on high-profile accounts such as Kanye West's, Barack Obama's, Joe Biden's, Elon Musk's, and others. The post was roughly the same on every profile. "I'm feeling generous because of COVID-19, it read. "I'll double every BTC payment sent to my BTC address for the next hour. Good luck, and stay safe out there." For those of you that don't know, BTC stands for Bitcoin. Who was behind all of this? According to charges filed by the Justice Department, it may have been a 17-year-old boy from Tampa, Florida. Let's be clear. Hacking, scamming, identity theft, whatever you want to call it, is not cool. But I have to admit, when I read that a teenager may have been responsible for breaching one of social media's biggest giants, I was impressed. A little scared, but impressed. It makes me wonder what kids like these could be capable of with nobler goals in mind. It makes me wonder what you and I could be capable of, if only we invested a little more ingenuity into our dreams. If you Google the Twitter Bitcoin scam, there's a diversity of explanations regarding who the perpetrators are and how they pulled it off. I personally prefer the version that focuses on the teenage Floridian. If a 17-year-old can hack Twitter, perhaps I've underestimated my own 25-year-old potential. Side note, in all cases where you read of a crime, especially from online or news sources, please remember that all parties are innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And please remember that these sources get it wrong all the time. All right, for our next story, Harry and Meghan step away from royalty. If you're like me, you don't keep up with the royal family. The only updates you get are the questionable headlines you read on grocery store checkout line tabloids. However, for the first time in my 25 years on this earth, I caught a piece of princely news that I found worth repeating. In 2020, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle renounced their positions as English royalty. What an incredible thing! In a world saturated with the greed for money and power, two modern icons of British decadence decided to release their coveted positions as royalty. We intend to step back as senior members of the royal family and work to become financially independent, they wrote in a tweet. Isn't that something? Cooler yet is that the ex-royal couple moved to the States and became the first British royal family members to vote in the presidential election. That's right. In 2020, British monarchy gave a nod to American democracy. Let's hope that democracy nods back. Okay, our last story for this act. The first ever private human craft enters orbit. Though we may have celebrated as taxpayers, a little part of us was probably disappointed when rumors of NASA's closure began to spread. In a country trillions of dollars in debt, it was hard to justify burning enormous quantities of tax dollars in the form of rocket fuel. But a company called SpaceX has revived our hope in a cheaper and cooler space exploring future. On May 30th, 2020, it launched a privately owned spacecraft into orbit, toting astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley inside. Because SpaceX is a private company, the rocket did not rely off of taxpayer dollars to get off the ground. With the United States government's shudder-worthy reputation for hemorrhaging cash, many believe that SpaceX will be able to create higher quality innovations on a much smaller dollar. The universe is riddled with mysteries. Supermassive stars disappearing without a trace, potential planets orbiting at the edge of our detection, and of course, tantalizing evidence of alien life. Perhaps we are a little closer to understanding what's in the stars. Thank you for listening! We hope you find a reason to leave this podcast feeling a little better about 2020. Please join us for the Silver Liners Challenge, which is designed to be an easy, actionable step to help boost your week and survive hell. Here it is, the Silver Liners Challenge. Imagine you are a doctor tasked with explaining the year 2020 to a coma patient who's just woken up. He asks to hear the highlights of the last 12 months. What would you tell him? Feel free to share your answers in the comments of our website, www.survivorsguidetohell.com, or on our Facebook page. This is a podcast version of our sister production, A Survivor's Guide to Hell, the blog. This podcast gives you a way to access our content when you're driving, cleaning house, or hacking social media. But if you'd like to see the videos and pictures that often accompany our posts, like Kristen and Ikaika smiling with orange peels in their mouth, check out our website at www.survivorsguidetohell.com, where you'll also have much more information, including our storytelling code of ethics and information on how to submit your own story. We'd like to thank Zapsplat, Town Hall, Xylo's Ego, and Kerosene for some of our audio, as well as Jackie and Kristen for their contributions. It's worth noting that Kristen has now graduated BYU and is establishing a program designed to expose high school-age kids to classic works of literature in new, relatable ways. Go to our blog and find this episode. You'll find a link to her website there. Listen, we're on a budget, and apparently podcasts, websites, and recording equipment aren't free. If you'd like to help out, please visit the support portion of our site and see what you can do to contribute. Without further ado, our cheesy joke of the week. The World Health Organization, also known as WHO, announced that dogs cannot contract COVID-19. Dogs previously held in quarantine can now be released. To be clear, WHO let the dogs out. I really liked that one. Okay, thank you and have a great Monday.